Hey guys, welcome to another RLCraft video. In this video, I will be going through all the baubles and hidden baubles in RLCraft 2.9 and ranking them from best to worst in a tier list. Keep in mind that these rankings are made considering many factors, examples being such as how difficult it is to acquire, its effect, what other baubles it has to compete with, whether the bauble thrives in PvP, PvE, early game, mid game, late game, etc., as well as a few other things. That being said, I also have a bit of bias for my favorite baubles, but I will try to stay fair for the most part. I will go through the baubles in alphabetical order and detail the effects of each baubles, how to acquire them, what they are reforged with, and their usefulness for the average RLCraft player, if any at all. Also, there are timestamps. Anyways, let's just jump right in. Starting off, we have the Ankh Charm, and the Ankh Charm grants immunities to most status effects. And remember, you can check any bauble's effects by hovering over the bauble and pressing Shift and or Control if applicable. And if you want to see how to make a bauble, you can hover over the bauble and press R for the recipe, or to see what crafting usefulness it has, you can press U instead. Anyways, the Ankh Charm is absolutely amazing. It's very hard to make as it requires a lot of baubles in order to craft it, and those baubles each are pretty hard to obtain, but it's really worth to get it in the end game. It only takes up one bauble slot and does the job of a lot of baubles. Also, quick disclaimer, keep in mind that silver armor makes you immune to all debuffs, making many of these baubles such as the Ankh Charm, Sunglasses, Teddy Bear completely useless in the end game when a player wears a max set of this armor. And I recognize this, but for the purpose of this tier list, I am going to rank these for a player who does not want to wear a full set of silver armor. For that reason, S tier for the Ankh Charm, since it's almost a full set of silver armor, but in a single bauble's form. Next up, the Ankh Shield. This grants partial fire resistance and the same things as the Ankh Charm, as well as complete knockback resistance, which is really only bad when trying to run away, so usually it's a good thing. The bauble used to not be able to be reforged for undying quality and hardy secondary quality, but now that it can, I would put this bauble actually a bit above the Ankh Charm. Do you need fire resistance when you reach the end game? No. Knockback resistance? Not really. But what the Ankh Shield does allow you to do is you can put this bauble in your offhand and use it as a regular shield, and it can be enchanted with all the regular shield enchantments such as natural blocking, empowered defense, and the like. When in your offhand, you do not have to be blocking, and you still get all the normal immunities to debuffs and the undying quality. Because of this frees up a bauble slot, and that is really amazing. Obviously, you need to be having the shield in your offhand, so you can't have like blocks or anything else in your offhand, but usually in the end game, you're going to want a shield in your offhand anyways, because natural blocking 2 is so great. You don't get the secondary bottom quality when holding it in your offhand, so you won't get the hardy quality, but that isn't too bad. The main downside, though, is that using this shield over a steel or diamond shield will give you less durability. The Ankh Shield only has a 1,680 durability and 16.2 blocking power, while the diamond shield, for example, has 20 blocking power and 2,560 durability. This just means that you don't really want to block with this shield much unless it's a last resort, but you still get the natural blocking 2 effect just by having the shield in your offhand. Empowered defense used to be an enchantment that would make using this shield a really bad thing because you would want to have as much durability as possible. But now that empowered defense only goes up to 2 instead of 4, it isn't really super meta anyways. And with mending on this shield, you can use it as an offhand shield, and that's perfectly fine. And this does add a lot to the character because it's a shield that literally is the Ankh Charm. You reforge the bauble and the above bauble, the Ankh Charm, with Spectral Silt. The Arcing Orb or Arsing Orb is up next. This orb grants the player 25% movement speed, which is pretty strong on its own, but the best ability is the double tap dodge ability that it grants you. By double tapping W, you dodge forward, leaving a small explosion where your dodge originated from, and this dodge will be unlocked to you when you're wearing the bauble. This will paralyze enemies, making them unable to chase you for about 3 seconds. You can also double tap the other directions to dodge in that way, like double tapping A, S, or D. Double tapping S to move backwards is probably the best use for this. You can also attack with a blast while the bauble is equipped, but the damage of the blast is absolutely terrible, and even in Golden Bookworm armor and Wildberry Wine, further increasing that magic damage, your charged attack will only do 60 damage, and it takes a long time to charge for max damage, but that magic attack can also be considered free damage since mana is like an unlimited rechargeable resource, especially if you're not using the Dragon Ring. Bows are better for ranged attacks though by far. The magic attack does not work in RLCraft 2.9 though due to a bug, but I assume it will be fixed in the upcoming versions. And it did work in 2.9.0, so it's probably just a small problem. Anyways, that magic attack is pretty bad anyways, besides like in the early game. But the bubble is hard to make, so no player is going to have it in the early game. So I would say you don't really need to worry about that magic attack. So I'm going to place it in the A tier because speed is just absolutely amazing in RLCraft, and having that free dodge to run away from like Lost Cities enemies that get too close to you with 3 seconds of them being paralyzed gives you a lot of time to run away. Next up, the Balloon Bauble. It increases your jump height and negates fall damage. You reforge the bauble with spectral silt, and it's pretty easy to make. It can also be found in many dungeons and miscellaneous structures in the world. I don't really have too much to say about this. It fits in the B tier. It's great in the mid game, and you're not going to really want to use it in the end game as there's better baubles. Next up, the Bezoar. Complete immunity to poison. Pretty common drop from cave spiders. You reforge this bauble from spectral silt, and it's a component to building the poison stone. Also a B bauble. It's pretty great since you get it early on from battle towers. Next up, the Black Dragon Scale. Also fairly simple. Complete immunity to wither, and you reforge this bauble with spectral silt. It's pretty hard to make though, so I'm gonna put it in the C tier. You're never really ever gonna use this bauble. You're probably just gonna use it as a component of the Mixed Dragon Scale to make the Ankh charm. Next up, the Broken Heart Bauble. So this is found in many dungeons and structures around the world. The bauble says that it will protect you from lethal damage by destroying your broken heart containers, and you need to sleep to get them back. But that is actually not the case. You see, the bauble only works on non-natural heart containers like the ones your baubles and enchantments give you, and only a few types of damage will you actually be saved from. This didn't used to be the case. The bauble actually used to be pretty good. Right now, the only example that I have found to be consistent for actually saving your life is fall damage, and fall damage is like one of the least of a player's worries in endgame RLCraft. Like maybe early on, having the bauble equipped might get a lucky save every now and then, but a good player will just catch themselves with a water bucket or fall in leaves, etc. So I'm actually going to have to put this bauble in the D tier. It really does not have a lot of use cases. It's reforged with spectral silt, so it's not really easy to get it undying quality. Next up, the Cobalt Shield. It gives you complete immunity to knockback and found in many dungeons and structures around the world, similar to the Broken Heart and the Balloon Bauble. And knockback resistance, like I said with the Ankh Shield, is pretty much always a good thing and only bad when you're trying to run away. And like the Ankh Shield, you can reforge the bauble for undying quality, and you can use this as a regular shield with normal shield enchantments. And the shield can be, reforged for athletic quality or punishing quality, offering your character a bit more utility than you could otherwise get. Same with the Ankh Shield. But, the main thing is you can enchant this shield if you want. The shield has 1008 durability though, and 10 blocking power, which makes it only about as good as an Iron Tower shield. So I would say if you're gonna use a bauble in your offhand and to max out the enchantments, I would really recommend going for the Ankh Shield instead of the Cobalt Shield, or at least the Obsidian Shield, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. But still, the bauble's pretty good. I'm going to put it in the B tier, and you reforge this bauble with iron ingots. Next up, the Cross Necklace. This is found in many dungeons and structures around the world, just like the previous baubles, and it's very easy to make. Not quite as easy to make as the Balloon Bauble, but this bauble is a little bit different. It's actually very amazing. You see, mobs have a chance to hit more than one time every second, and you will get hit many times every second when surrounded by enemies. But when you're wearing this necklace, you can only take damage in a small window once every second. And this can be a lifesaver when surrounded by many enemies, and some players may not notice this, but it does actually stop you from taking a lot of damage. The necklace, unfortunately, does not work against magic attacks like Asmodeus, Rahalvard, or Amalgalich, though, so you do have to keep that in mind. Overall, though, I'm going to have to put this necklace at the top of the B tier. I would put this necklace a little bit higher up, but the fact of the matter is that it is a necklace, so it has a lot of competition for that spot. You're never really going to be using this over the Stone of the Sea or the Wrath Pendant in the endgame, etc. You reforge this bauble with Spectral Silt. Next up, the Dragon's Eye. It's hard to make, but grants full fire resistance, the ability to track different ores, and toggleable night vision. The bauble also makes you immune to hyperthermia, so you're never going to need to worry about the heat again. You can literally just swim in lava all day and never take damage. And lastly, the bauble makes you immune to the fiery splat effect that dragons will inflict upon you, which is really, really annoying. It makes fighting dragons a chore. You reforge this bauble with glowing ingots, and it sits comfortably up in the S tier. All right, so the Emerald Necklace and the Emerald Ring are up next. They're both incredibly simple baubles with no effects and are reforged with emeralds. They're still better than nothing, but they are reforged with emeralds, which you do need desperately in the early game, and these are pretty much only going to be useful in the early game for like the undying quality. Potion rings are also super easy to make, and they just require lapis and gold and are reforged with gold, which is less valuable. So I would actually say potion rings are better than emerald rings, but the thing is that the emerald necklace is going into the necklace slot, so it's a little bit better than the emerald ring because you don't really get necklaces as easily as like the early game. So for that reason, I'm going to put the emerald necklace in the D tier, but the emerald ring is going into the F tier. Next up, we have the Ender Queen's Crown. This bauble used to be absolutely atrocious, but it's actually really good now. You see, Endermen fight for you when you have it equipped, which is, you know, whatever, Endermen are weak, but you also have 5% chance to ignore damage from any attack and a 5% chance to spawn an Enderman whenever you're attacked. The bauble also makes you immune to hypothermia, so you never need to worry about the cold ever again as long as you have this bauble in your ender chest and just equip it when you're in cold areas. One downside to this bauble is that if you have this bauble equipped, you will lose 5 mana every second that you are touching water or standing in rain. If you run out of mana this way, you will start taking damage until you get out of the water or seek shelter from the rain. The damage that you take is very little compared to in previous versions of RLCraft though, so you can still clear underwater dungeons with this crown on with ease as long as you have a means to heal yourself every once in a while, and I found that kind of funny. The other downside of this bauble is that you can only wear the bauble on your head though, so you are gonna have to choose if you either want to wear this bauble or the Dragon's Eye. But once you get the Ring of the Dragons in the end game, this is no longer a problem. But you know, when exploring cold biomes in search of ice dragons, you're not gonna need fire protection or heat resistance very much at all, so this bauble is really good. However, I will say that while the Dragon's Eye is harder to make, I would still prefer it over the crown for most content in the game. You will only ever want to wear the crown everywhere once you're max in the end game or in the end, just so you have like Endermen always fighting for you because they're literally just going to be attacking everything. But yeah, for those reasons, I'm actually going to put this bauble in the A tier. It is reforged with glowing ingots. Next up, the Faeles Claw. Your attacks now will make an enemy bleed for 15 points of damage when transformed as a Faeles, or 5 points of damage otherwise, and this is total over the course of a few seconds. The ring makes the player do 25% more attack damage though, which is honestly pretty amazing for nearly all offensive builds where damage is the focus over protection, and I often wear this bauble in the endgame for damage. It's kind of hard to make for a ring bauble, and other ring baubles are super useful in the endgame, so this bauble will sit at the top of B tier, but for an offensive tool, it would be S tier. Therefore, I'm going to put it in the A tier, and keep in mind that if you have this bauble in the endgame and you're fully buffed up with potion effects, this is an amazing offensive tool. Because, you know, that 25% damage increase is invisible, so no matter how many potion effects you have, it's still going to be put into effect. And you reforge this bauble with glowing ingots. Next up, the Forbidden Fruit. It grants immunity to the hunger status effect and nausea. The hunger status effect isn't really a worry, but nausea can be annoying. And drinking too much wine in game gives the player nausea through inebriation. With this bauble, you can drink wine without using silver armor in the overworld though. The Ankh Charm also gives you these immunities, but if you find this bauble in one of the many dungeons or structures this can drop in, this certainly is a good thing. These also drop very rarely from husks, which are otherwise known as the vanilla desert zombies. I'm going to put this in B tier just because that interaction with wine is not bad, but it's going to be low B tier. You reforge it with spectral silt. Moving on to the Gluttony Pendant. It's not super easy to make, but it makes you eat and drink things very fast, which can be incredibly useful in the mid game. It also grants you the Sinful buff at level 3 for 10 seconds when you eat. Very useful, but it is a necklace, which makes it a contested bauble for the end game. But keep in mind that this is one of, if not the best necklace for PvP. But it's not really a first pick for much of anything else besides perhaps an under-equipped Rahovart or Asmodeus fight, which is sad because I think it's an incredibly fun necklace that I've used a lot in the past. But because of its competition, I'm gonna have to just put it in the high B tier. Next up, the Miner's Ring. It's found in many dungeons and a few structures around the world. It grants a slight haste buff when mining. The problem is that this ring takes up the drop chance of many other better baubles, items, and rings. This item is not obtainable in many easy to access areas, so when you find this ring, odds are you will not need the pathetically weak haste buff that it gives you, which is is even worse than Haste 1. And Haste is really only impactful when it is at a high level anyways, and 2 of these Miner's Rings do not even stack the effect. Not only this, but the ring is a ring, and this slot should be reserved for much better rings. Lastly, it can only be reforged with nether stars. Like, this bauble was not even really supposed to be worn. So yeah, overall, this ring is absolutely atrocious, and since you need nether stars to reforge it, good luck getting Undying quality, and the haste effect is atrocious, and the F tier, even below the emerald ring, because the effect is basically useless. Next up, the mixed color dragon scale. I don't really have too much to say about this. It's just a combination of a black dragon scale and a Bezoar and an Anvil, so obviously it's just better than the both of them. But you don't really get this until the end game, and you usually just use it when you're crafting the Ankh charm. On its own, it still does grant immunity to poison and wither, so it's not bad at all, but you will rarely wear it. I'm still going to put it in the B tier right above the Bezoar, and you reforge it with Spectral Silt. Now, the Obsidian Shield. It is one of the hardest mid-game baubles to make, needing to combine a Cobalt Shield with an Obsidian Skull in a crafting table. And you would be honestly better just making potions of fire resistance before taking on dragons, but the bauble does grant partial fire resistance and full knockback resistance. The shield has 1344 durability and has all the same perks as the Cobalt Shield and the Ankh Shield, so I wouldn't say it's super good. In RLCraft, when you have partial fire resistance, you might as well not have any fire resistance, because fire is super dangerous from the few sources that you can get hit by it, like lava or dragons. So I'm sadly going to have to put this bauble in the high C tier, despite it being a really nifty bauble. And you might be wondering, you know, why is it below the Cobalt Shield? And that's just because it's harder to make, and you're not really going to feel that much safer with it. You're still going to feel like the shield is pretty brittle, but it looks super cool. You do have to give it that. You reforge it with Obsidion Skull. Only a bit easier to obtain than the shield, but also just gives that false sense of security. I'm still not very confident taking on dragons with just an Obsidian Shield on. You might as well just make potions of fire resistance. They're fairly easy to make once you get to the point of fighting dragons. But if you are speedrunning RLCraft and you never find a stage 5 dragon skull for your dragon's eye, then this shield can be a copium tool for fighting Rauhvart, because it will keep, you know, dispelling your fire resistance. But other than that, I really don't see the Obsidian Skull or Obsidian Shield being meta for just about anything. So I'm also going to put it in the high C tier, right behind the shield. Next up, please forgive me for my pronunciation of this, but the Phytoprostasia Amulet, I think that's how you say it. This amulet, honestly, is incredibly easy to make. And with the Scarlite Reaver being such a great weapon early on, making one of these super quick in the Defiled Lands is actually not a bad idea if you know you will be there for an extended period of time. This necklace protects you from Vilespine and the exploding Blastum orange fruit that can be found solely in the Defiled Land biome, making it at least more useful than the Emerald necklace. Mining for Umbrian ingots needed to reforge this necklace is not too difficult, and I'd say it's cheaper than Emerald, and can be argued to be faster than reforging with Emeralds early on for the Emerald necklace as well. So while the bubble's still not incredibly insane, I'd say it's better than the Emerald necklace early on, since it at least has a little bit of use in the Defiled Lands, because you might be in the Defiled Lands for a while, breeding bookworms if you're into that, or trying to get a Scarlite Reaver. Moving on to the Poison Stone. It gives you immunity to poison and hunger, and it isn't too difficult to make considering this is an endgame bauble. You're going to be keeping this bauble in just about every single build, unless you don't use a melee weapon with Envenomed and Viper. This bauble makes you do 50% extra damage to all enemies that are poisoned, and it is one of the most meta items in the game right now. The bauble also gives you a 20% chance to poison enemies with every hit, so the Poison Stone is great on its own, but when you do combine it with a max enchanted weapon with Envenomed and Viper, this poisons enemy 100% of the time when your weapon strikes. The bauble really starts showing how amazing it is as an offensive bauble, making you do just 50% extra damage that scales with all your enchantments. You reforge this bauble with glowing ingots, and this bauble fits firmly up in the S tier. Next up, the Polarizing Stone. This bauble gives you an optional 2 abilities. The first ability is the Repel ability that deflects all arrows that are fired at you, making skeletons useless. You can turn this effect on or off with the Ox Key keybind. The problem is that by the time you get the glowing ingots to make this bauble, skeletons will not really be much of a worry, and this Repel effect drains your hunger bar fairly fast. The second effect is the more practical effect, Magnet. This effect draws in all drops on the floor to to your feet, so you merely need to crouch every once in a while to pick everything up, which is very convenient. This can be turned on or off with the Polarized Stone magnet keybind, which can be found and changed in your controls menu. This bubble is very convenient for large dungeon crawls and mining blocks for building projects, but other than that, this bubble honestly is not that great. For combat, you would rather a Toolbelt, which also fights for the belt bubble slot. You reforge this bubble with glowing ingots. I'm going to slide it at the top of C tier. Now on to the legendary potion rings, and we're starting off with quite the interesting one. The potion ring of Diamond Skin. This is a secret bauble that can only be obtained from mega battle towers, 4 tower dungeons, 4 strongholds, and a few dungeons of that same grade. Now, here is where I will put 2 disclaimers. The first is that all defense granting baubles in the game right now could be ranked lower because of an invincibility glitch that surrounds Ironberries. Shivaxi, the mod author of RLCraft, knows about this glitch, and in the recently released hardcore config, he has already fixed this glitch. So it is clear to say that in future versions of RLCraft, this glitch will not exist. But right now, if you were to eat an Ironberry and extend its effect with wine in RLCraft version 2.9 and 2.9.1, you would be invincible to all enemies except for Lycanite creatures. Obviously, you know, that means yes, you could go into the Lost Cities dimension with just eating Ironberries, not Ironberry wine, and literally nothing will do harm to you. It won't damage your armor, it will do nothing. And then against Lycanite creatures, the damage cap of 80% is reached. So Lycanite creatures will still do damage to you, but heavily decreased. Fortunately, the damage of like Rahalvart, Amalgalich, and Asmodeus is so high that even with 80% damage resistance from the Ironberries, you can still take damage if you're not careful. But yeah, because of the Ironberries existing right now in just base 2.9 RLCraft, it could be argued that all defense-giving baubles are completely useless if one was to take advantage of this glitch. But I am going to rank the baubles accordingly to RLCraft 2.9.2, even though I don't know when that's going to be out. And I'm also going to assume that you, the player, will not be taking advantage of this invincibility glitch when I do my rankings. So I will rank the Potion Ring and Diamond Skin and the other defensive baubles fairly. The second disclaimer is that all Potion Ring effects and a few other bauble effects, for that matter, can be increased to level 3 with Wildberry Wine and the buff time extended forever as long as you keep drinking regular wine. This means that all you need is one of each potion ring and a lot of wine, and now you have each potion ring effect at level 3. For the purpose of the tier list, I will not consider this in the ranking, and I will just rank the baubles for how strong the baubles are on their own, considering, you know, the effects of the bauble itself. But yes, at the end of the endgame, you can technically make all the rings unnecessary by just equipping them on the character, drinking wine, and taking the ring off and replacing it with another bauble. Anyways, let's get back to the tier list with the potion of Diamond Skin. Each Diamond Skin ring grants the player 4 armor toughness, which can be loosely correlated to about 8 regular armor points of protection. But I didn't actually calculate that. That just made sense to me when I was using armor set meta defense ranking. Anyways, while that is not a factual conversion rate, I'm just saying that armor toughness is good. Wearing 2 of the rings grants the player 8 armor toughness, and an entire set of Masterful Dragon armor only offers the player 12 armor toughness, for example. The armor set then goes on to offer the player 73 regular armor protection, so of course dragon armor is better than just wearing these 2 rings, but the 2 rings do make you more defensive. The rings for that use are fairly strong. Considering how you can get them very rarely though, and in dangerous late mid to end game dungeons, I'm gonna have to put the ring towards the top of the B tier though. There are even stronger rings coming up. All of these potion rings can be reforged with gold ingots. Next up, the Potion Ring of Haste, a mid-tier potion ring requiring Prismarine to make and can also be found in the same endgame dungeons as the other potion rings, but the bauble is pretty useful in the mid-game as Haste will allow you to mine all blocks and mob spawners faster. The difference between Haste 1 and Haste 2 is small though, so just wearing one ring will make you feel the difference even without drinking wine, which is nice. Considering how hard the ring falls off in the endgame though, I don't see you really ever using it there. I'm going to have to put it in the C tier. Next up, the Potion Ring of Health Boost. This is another secret bauble that can be obtained from mega battle towers, 4 tower dungeons, 4 strongholds, and other dungeons of that same grade. These rings grant the player 4 hearts or 2 heart containers each, and this alone is incredibly good. Hitting the max damage reduction cap of 80% is not all that difficult. Natural blocking 2, resistance 3 from potion effects in wine, as well as dragon or golem armor with advanced protection and undying quality baubles will put you over the cap. Therefore, once you hit the max damage reduction, more hearts equals more chances of not dying, and these rings are your best bet since they extend your life force further, etc. But yeah, if you get these rings luckily in the mid to end game, you certainly will be happy. It's a great resource. I'm going to put the Potion Ring of Health Boost in the low S tier. The Potion Ring of Iron Skin. This is another secret bauble that can be obtained the exact same way as the Potion of Health Boost and the Potion Ring of Diamond Skin. Calculating how much these rings protect you isn't quite as simple as I thought, but each of these rings gives you 1 bar of armor. A Dragon Helm at 19 armor protection gives you 2 bars of armor, but an Iron Chestplate at 15 protection gives you 3 bars of armor, for example. Because of this, I'm unsure exactly as to how good these rings are, but from damage testing, these rings decrease the amount of damage I took slightly more than the Potion Rings of Diamond Skin, surprisingly. So the Potion Ring of Iron Skin is ever so slightly better. Because of this, I'm going to be placing it right above that ring in the B tier. Next up, the Potion Ring of Jump Boost. You need Rabbit's Feet to make, which you would be better off using to tame a Hippogriff in RLCraft 2.9. The ring also takes up a valuable spawn chance in endgame dungeons where you would much prefer getting a Ring of Health Boost, for example. The ring only gives a slight jump boost. Wearing 2 of them together doesn't make the jump any more impressive. The best thing about this ring for the endgame is that if you wear 2 of these rings, you can cancel out the Stone of Greater Inertia's insane jump height, even when wearing a set of speed increasing armor like Silver. This insane jump height caused by increased player speed can sometimes be annoying to manage. This allows your endgame speed demon character to actually have a normal jump height, which is pretty neat. I would say most players don't care too much about the insane jump height to sacrifice 2 ring slots though, or, you know, drink wine enough to keep the jump boost effect on. So overall, this ring is in the D tier. Next up, the Potion Ring of Magic Focus. Another hidden ring found in the same location as the before mentioned. Wearing 2 of these rings is about as good as wearing a full set of golden bookworm armor. And if you drink enough wildberry wine, you only need 1 of these rings and you can stay in your normal armor to get max magic damage effects, etc. The problem is that magic damage in the game is only strong in the early game and then falls off super hard in the end game, making it pretty much never needed. The Arcing Orb and the Rings of the Dragon are 2 amazing baubles, but you don't need their magic damage to be 50% more. The baubles are good for other reasons, and besides, 0 times 1.5 is still 0. Sorry, bad joke. But anyways, magic sadly isn't very great in RLCraft. I wish these rings worked with the magic effects that the Equipment Forge weapons have. Then these rings would be much better. Overall, since these rings only give magic damage and no use cases even in the endgame, since magic right now is really useless there, I will put this ring in the F tier, which is very unfortunate. If somehow the magic damage did work with Equipment Forge tools and the like though, then the ring would be A tier. Next up, the Potion Ring of Reach. You find the secret ring at the same way as the other secret rings, but this ring isn't quite as useful. Wearing the ring merely extends the range of your melee weapon. This still is a great resource, but not a necessity by any means. A normal player's reach is about 5 to 6 blocks or so, and reach 1 makes you reach 7 blocks, reach 2 makes it 8 blocks, and reach 3 makes it 9. It looks like 9 blocks is the furthest reach a default player can achieve. Enchantments and a pike with sweeping quality will not extend this effect, so with a reach you can just use a one-handed weapon and achieve this insane reach, which is fun but not too crazy good unless for like poking mobs underground through a hole in the wall in like a battle tower or like a mob farm. So I'm gonna put this into the C tier. Next up, the Potion Ring of Regeneration. Not the easiest bauble to make since it requires a Nether Star and gas tiers, but the ring can also be found in the same dungeons as the other rings, and it's certainly useful in mid-game. Now, cooked aspen meat or mossy pie also gives the effect, and even more potently though, so the ring is more for convenience and fighting off small damage over time like temperature damage. In the endgame, your weapons will heal you so much with the right enchantments and like a blood chili plus paleo salad, making this ring completely obsolete. But in the mid game, it isn't bad at all. I'm going to put this ring into the B tier. Next up, the Potion Ring of Resistance. This ring is super hard to make now as the Heart of Diamond drops so rarely from stonelings. I believe it's like a 5% chance for a stoneling to drop this item, and stonelings are fairly uncommon and only spawn under Y20. The ring also does not drop in the same dungeons as the other potion rings, so your only chance is crafting the ring itself. However, once you do get the ring gives you a set 15% damage reduction, and with 2 of them it becomes 30%. Resistance used to give you you 20% per tier, but it is 15% in RLCraft, which is still super good though. What is even better though is that the Rings of Resistance do stack with the Shield of Honor in RLCraft 2.9 now, so you can get a permanent Resistance 3 buff if you wear all 3 baubles at the same time for a 45% damage reduction, even if you are naked otherwise, and you obviously don't need to drink any wine for these effects. This is super amazing and really helps a player reach the overall damage reduction cap of 80% in RLCraft. With just these 3 baubles and Undying Quality on all 7 of your baubles, and let's assume you're also using an offhand shield with Undying Quality, you're already at a clean 69% damage reduction, even without wearing armor, and that's pretty sweet. The ring, sadly though, being so hard to make, makes it just miss out on S tier, and food and wine make it unnecessary. But it is still a wonderful bauble and is a lazy man's best friend because, you know, no wine or food, etc. Because of this, I'm going to put the Potion Ring of Resistance into the high A tier. Next up, the Potion Ring of Speed. Super easy to make and is great for the early and mid game. I highly recommend this ring on, as speed lets you run away from things, and in RLCraft you don't want to fight everything. It really is not worth it. You should only take on the battles that you want to, or fight in a controlled setting in a battle tower. If a blight spawns, retreat unless you have a foolproof plan of action, etc. This ring is a solid B tier bauble and is accessible very early on. Next up, the Potion Ring of Strength. It's super good and fairly easy to make once you reach the nether, and you can also obviously make it without the nether. I can say a player can replace their speed rings with strength rings when it comes time to, as the damage they give is very noticeable. Strength also stacks with the sinful damage effect that pendants give you, so the strength buff is always useful. Overall though, this ring sits at top of B tier, not as good as the Faeles Claw for damage, but a pretty great mid-game utility. Next up, the Potion Ring of Trueshot. Another secret ring acquired the same way as the aforementioned secret rings. This ring makes bows do a bit more damage. Arrows do differing amounts of damage when fired, but the increase in base damage seems to always be around 15 to 20% more damage per hit, which is okay. But strength, and I just described the Potion Ring of Strength, strength gives an increase to base weapon damage by 50% per tier, which is a lot more than 50 to 20%, so it's obviously better. Because of this, while the buff does make bows do more damage and can be fun in like an only bows playthrough or in an elf playthrough, I'm gonna still place this ring into the C tier because there are frankly just better rings. Next up, just the regular potion ring. It's pretty easy to make, easier to make than the emerald ring. I'm gonna just slide this ring right into the D tier. It's just great early on, really nothing too crazy about it. Well, let's move right on to the Pride Pendant. Besides the 7 spectral silt needed to craft this bauble, it is not too hard to craft, and the bauble grants the Sinful 1 buff when worn at full health. Keeping full health and wine abilities or good defense while in combat is not hard, but Sinful 1 only increases damage by about 20% base weapon or so. It's pretty nice, but the Wrath Pendant gives Sinful 4, which gives you 80% more damage, and that's just objectively much better. This Pride Pendant isn't too bad as a mid-game bauble, but I can argue that the Gluttony Pendant is better, so I'm going to place it below it. Still in the B tier though, like this is a usable bauble. Now the Quivers, they all really tell the same tale. They hold arrows and supply arrows to you when turned on at the cost of taking up your offhand when your bow is being used. Not bad for mid-game as a bow user at all, but it falls off once you hit the end game as switch bows can't use them for swapping arrows, and Infinity is a great enchantment. The bauble also can only be placed in the body slot, so you can't use the Shield of Honor alongside a quiver, so they fall off hard in the endgame. Quivers all sit in the D tier, with the diamond ones obviously being better and the bolt quivers being even lower, as endgame crossbows pretty much always are going to use infinity and there are less unique bolts compared to arrows. You reforge these with leather. Next up, the Ring of Enchanted Eyes. Mainly known for being a crafting ingredient for the Dragon's Eye, but the ring on its own gives the player some effects as well. The first one is +1 luck, and the second one is night vision, but it cannot be toggled off like the Dragon's Eye. Now the +1 luck can be useful for looting areas with non-pregenerated loot, such as Lycanite dungeons and the Lost Cities. This luck effect is invisible and does stack with luck potions and all other luck effects. I could definitely feel my increased luck while exploring the Lost Cities with luck 3, luck on my helm, and this ring on for another +1 luck. It doesn't help too much, but for max luck, it is a necessity, besides one of the transformation rings that are coming up that gives you +2 luck. It does not stack with itself though, so you can only wear one ring. If you wear this ring, plus the transformation ring I'm going to talk about later, then you get +3 luck, and that is how you get the max luck in the game, which I kind of call it like the looting build. But I wouldn't really use this bauble unless you're only looting things and feel like you can sacrifice a bauble slot. The ring sits in the B tier. Now on to the Ring of Free Action. This is one of my favorite baubles, as I absolutely despise cobwebs in RLCraft, and this ring lets you move freely through them. And yes, I know there are ways to deal with them, but sometimes they're just very annoying. When you're like mid-air, it takes longer to mine them as well. The ring makes you also immune to levitation and slowness, which is helpful, and not necessary when you have the Ankh charm though. It is hard to make though, requiring the Ring of Overclocking, which is rare and can only be found as a drop from ultra and higher enemies, in Shivaxi monuments, and from strays, which are the cold vanilla skeletons that shoot the enchanted arrows. And you also have to use a Shulker Heart when crafting the bauble. You combine a Shulker Heart and the Ring of Overclocking in an anvil. And the Shulker Hearts can only be found in the end from killing Shulker boxes and maybe the Shivaxi monument. Either way, this is an endgame bauble for sure, but I really hate webbing enemies in cobwebs, and this is the only way in the game to be immune to the Ring of Free Action, except for when you're flying with like the Fairy Ring, it seems that you also can just move through them. But anyways, I told you I had some bias for this list, and I don't care. I really like this ring, so I'm going to be placing this ring into the S tier. Alright, next up, the Ring of Overclocking. It grants some movement speed and immunity to slowness. This movement speed is invisible and stacks with other movement speed effects, but honestly, the movement speed it gives you is very small and hard to notice once you start increasing your movement speed with buffs and increasing your sprint speed in the L menu. This ring isn't very good despite movement speed being useful, because there are ways to get so much speed in the game that you really won't notice that extra little bit. Immunity to slowness isn't bad though, but the ring is not easy to acquire and is primarily used in crafting a Ring of Free Action, so I'm going to place this in the low B tier. Next up, the Ring of the Dragons. Now, quick disclaimer. All of the following transformation rings I'm about to mention, starting with the Ring of the Dragons and ending with the Ring of the Titans, can only be found in the Lost Cities dimension in chest loot, and these rings can all be made into permanent transformation consumables, so you don't even need to wear the bauble in your ring slot. In the end game, it is better to use the transformation item as it will free up a bauble slot, and if you die, you won't risk going back and not being able to retrieve your transformation ring. If you die while transformed in RLCraft 2.9, you will not lose your transformation. You can only get your transformation overwritten by wearing another transformation ring, or you can remove your transformation entirely with a restoration serum, which is not insanely hard to make when you're in the endgame. These transformations are incredibly powerful for this fact alone, but I will not be ranking these transformations. Instead, I will be ranking the baubles themselves. With that out of the way, let's continue with the tier list. All of these transformation rings grant the player invisible buffs, which are fairly powerful. The Ring of the Dragons in particular grants 25% extra health, 25% attack damage, 50% armor toughness, which is absolutely nuts, especially if you're wearing golem armor, 20% increased size, full fire resistance, the ability to breathe fire with the X key by default, cool wings that you can change to whatever color you want on a color wheel, and the ability to fly quickly through the air in exchange for losing some mana over time while in flight. You do swim 25% less fast while wearing the ring, but I don't think that's a very big deal. The ring is every RL crafter's dream bauble and is absurdly amazing in both offense and defense. This bauble feels more rare than the other transformation rings though, as I almost never seem to find it. But once you do find the ring, you fear very little. This ring sits at the top of the S tier. You reforge all of these transformation rings with glowing ingots. Next up, the Ring of the Dwarves. This ring is rather weird, but not terrible actually. The ring grants the player an invisible fortune buff that is about in between fortune 1 and 2 in strength, and it makes all pickaxes under diamond pickaxes mine just as fast as diamond pickaxes, but dragonbone and sincenite pickaxes still mine faster than these. The ring gives you more XP from mining ores like coal and diamond than you otherwise would have, allows you to obtain XP from mining gold, iron, and other ores that previously didn't give you XP orbs, makes you 75% normal size, gives you 10% more attack damage, 25% armor toughness, which is solid, and 0.25 knockback resistance. In exchange though, you do lose 25% attack speed, 25% health, 10% movement speed, and 25% reach. Overall, because of these things, the ring is only good if you like mining or role-playing as a dwarf. The 25% health loss is not worth the 25% armor toughness and 10% attack damage, and the mining buffs are nice, but mining isn't super useful in RLCraft compared to other methods. It certainly is safer than other methods, but by the time you can actually explore the Lost Cities for this ring, you won't really need mining for almost anything. For these reasons, I'm going to have to put the ring in the C tier. Next up, the Ring of the Elves. This ring grants the player 25% less attack damage, but it makes you gain attack speed and movement speed while in forests, and the speed buff is noticeable, but not insane. The power shot the bow gives you though is no joke, allowing for massive damage on your arrow shots. This really is useful only for downing dragons in a few shots though, and by the time you get this ring you shouldn't be too worried about dragons, and losing 25% attack damage with melee weapons is certainly not a good thing. This ring sits in the B tier. Next up, the Ring of the Faeles. This ring makes you 85% the normal size of a player, grants you a significant increase to barehanded damage, 50% attack speed, 25% movement speed, 50% swim speed, 60% jump height, and strength 1, speed 1, and jump boost 4 when drinking milk. The downside is that if you are wearing heavy armor, you will get a movement speed penalty. This penalty is barely felt, however, and when wearing silver armor, it is not a problem at all, because of the speed that silver armor gives you. This ring is by far more perks than disadvantages, and is my personal second favorite transformation behind the Dragon's Ring, and honestly rivals it in many ways. The number one way this strength shows its insane strength is through the 50% attack speed buff. On its own, that doesn't seem super strong, but this allows for the fastest burst of DPS in the game by far. Because of this, a player utilizing nunchucks with combo Swifter Slash's fiery edge while wearing the Ring of the Faeles is like the best PvP melee utility in the game, because you're attacking so fast that Atomic Deconstructor on your weapon is bound to proc relatively soon. It was hard for me to even damage test because the weapon attacked so fast that the damage dummies and pigs that I was fighting against, they just kept being destroyed. Now, the defensive capabilities of this ring are not there, and the Dragon Ring allowing you to fly is absolutely amazing. But if you do just consume a potion of wings, then you can fly and be a Faeles. The Ring of the Faeles grants the highest DPS potential in the game, and I think that that is absolutely phenomenal. If the game could actually calculate the damage that this does, it would be even better. But yeah, in PvP, the attack speed is absolutely insane. This ring sits calmly in the S tier. Next up, the Ring of the Fairies. Absolutely F tier. No, okay. But wow, this ring has really fallen far. It used to be like the best bauble in the game, and now it's almost unusable for like anything besides building. The ring grants you, if you don't know, creative mode flight, and this flight does not cost any mana to maintain. Pretty good. But the ring also makes you do 75% less damage, have 75% less hearts, and 50% less armor, 25% less armor toughness, 25% less movement speed, 25% less swim speed, 50% less reach, 25% less jump height, and minus 0.35 step height. The free flight is hardly worth all these downsides, especially since potions of wings exist. You know, you need to be able to do a certain amount of damage against like Ralvards in stage 3, or else you're gonna have a really hard time. If you do use the Ironberry invincibility glitch, then sure, you can cheese the Lost Cities and loot while wearing this ring, I guess, but you really won't be able to do it in the newer versions of RLCraft. But yes, this ring does give you the +2 luck. So using a Ring of the Fairies alongside a Ring of Enchanted Eyes and the luck 3 buff while having, you know, luck quality on your helmet, that is the most luck that you can get in the game as far as I know. But, you know, looting in the Lost Cities dimension with the Ring of the Fairies without the invincibility of the Ironberries is very risky. And, you know, the Ironberries will not grant invincibility with the upcoming patches. But yeah, the Ring of the Fairies for combat and looting is very risky. The +2 luck that it gives is nice, but it just completely gives you downsides besides that extra flight. If you are maxed out on damage reduction and potion effects, as well as playing super carefully, you should still be fine though, but I don't really want to risk losing everything over a little bit of extra luck and saving a few potions of flight and or wine. But you know, for its use cases in the luck 2 and the flight, I'm going to still place it in the C tier. Next up, the Ring of the Goblins. This ring is pretty fun. It grants the player 20% movement speed, plus 1 luck, just like the Ring of Enchanted Eyes, 20% movement speed, 10% swim speed, 20% jump height, makes all creepers ignore you, grants you partial fire resistance and explosion resistance, makes you 50% the size of normal, and allows you to mount tamed wolves. Now, while on the mounted wolf, you will gain a regeneration buff and a strength buff, but these buffs are fairly minor, only being about as good as strength 1 and regeneration 1. The ring also makes you lose 50% base health, 25% attack speed, and 25% reach. Now, it is fun riding wolves for sure, and it is super smooth to fight on the wolf, but this bauble is really only useful in the overworld. You can find wolves in the Lost Cities dimension, so it is a fun way to, you know, ride mounts in the dimension, even though you're kind of not supposed to. But the wolf will get very slaughtered easily by the dangerous enemies there, so it isn't very useful. The speed and luck the ring gives you is nice for sure, but losing 50% base health and 25% attack speed is really not good. But, you know, on the bright side, you can mount a wolf with this ring and then transform into a titan with the Ring of a Titans, and then you're like this massive titan riding this small wolf, and I think that's kind of funny, I guess. But yeah, I'm going to have to put this ring into the C tier. Lastly, the Ring of the Titans. The ring grants the player 100% more health, and this scales with the overall health that you have. It also gives you 100% attack damage, 25% movement speed, 50% more reach, 75% jump height, 1.4 step height, and 75% knockback resistance, with the only cost of you sinking in water, you trample plants, and you lose 50% attack speed. Now, being 300% normal size, the ring also makes you that big, by the way, if you didn't quite catch that. Being 300% normal size could be considered a downside, but the ring also lets you mine in a 3x3x3 manner, which is equivalent to 1 block normally for your character. So you can certainly move around, it just might be hard to wrap your head around how. The ring's main downside is the 50% loss on attack speed, like I said. But, you know, brawling in the streets of the Lost Cities dimension, fighting Rahalvard and Asmodeus, and being an ultimate killing machine, having double hearts, is absolutely absurd, and this makes the ring quite a necessity for the strongest defense build in the game. I'm going to place this ring in the solid A tier. It would be S tier, but you can't really use the ring seamlessly everywhere, and honestly, it can be annoying just trying to function with the ring if you're not used to it. Next up, the Scarlite Ring. This grants the player a small invisible regeneration buff, but the buff is incredibly minor that it might as well not exist, sadly. It is convenient, saving you some bandages in the early and mid game, but that is about all it does. It isn't super hard to make though, and with many players in the Defiled Lands early on trying to go for the Scarlite Dagger, they can potentially make this ring. I'm going to place this right at the tippity tip bottom of the C tier. You reforge it with Umbrian ingots. Next up, the Shield of Honor. This is honestly such an amazing bubble. It takes a bit to make, but once you defeat the Ender Dragon or a tier 5 dragon, you're basically in the home stretch in obtaining the bubble. This bubble gives you resistance 1, grants the player 75% explosion resistance, gives the player a 10% chance to ignore any headshot attack, and makes you completely ignore the damage of every 6th attack your player takes. This is really insane. What this means is that every time you're hit 5 times, the 6th time you will avoid the attack 100% of the time. This bubble is really amazing and should always sit in the chest bauble slot for an M game character that doesn't like taking damage. This bubble sits firmly in the S tier. Next up, Shulker Heart. Grants the player immunity to levitation and can be obtained from defeating shulkers in the end. The bubble is mainly used as a crafting component and not worn much, and immunity to levitation isn't super useful anyways, as no dangerous enemies will wield levitation to a very scary degree. I'm going to place this bubble in the C tier. Next up, the Sin Pendant. No effect on its own, it's just a crafting component that can be used for crafting the Gluttony and Pride Pendant, but it's useful for nothing else. It can be obtained in endgame dungeons such as Lycanite dungeons, Doomlight dungeons, and many others, and it can be crafted with Spectral Silt. The pendant on its own is basically an emerald necklace that is harder to make and reforged with Spectral Silt though. So I'm gonna have to put this bubble into the F tier. Now on to some big boys. The Stone of Greater Inertia. This bubble is one of the most insane baubles in the game. You can obtain the bubble only from slaying infernal mobs, and each enemy in a world has about a 1 in 1000 chance of being spawned in as an infernal. If a normal mob stays alive for 5 minutes in a loaded chunk or so, then we'll have a chance of becoming a rare ultra or infernal, but the chances are still fairly low that it'll be an infernal. When you defeat an infernal mob, there is a 1 in 50 to 60 items that drop. I forgot the exact amounts, maybe it's 54, and one of those 54 is the Stone of Greater Inertia. By that logic, an average luck player will get 1 Stone of Greater Inertia after defeating 54,000 enemies in RLCraft. So yes, the bubble is very hard to obtain. If you get this bubble though, you will gain 75% fall resistance. It also gives you 50% knockback resistance, 100% speed, and 100% jump height. The 100% speed is what is absolutely nuts about this bubble. And this is double the speed boost that silver armor gives you. And the speed boost of the two sources do stack together. The speed that this bubble gives you is hard to fathom. It allows you to control all fights you get yourself into, and the jump height alongside some extra speed is enough to get you out of many sticky situations. This bubble is wonderful as both an offensive tool and a defensive tool, and sits comfortably in the S tier. You reforge this bubble with glowing ingots. Next up, the Stone of Inertia Null. This can be only obtained through the same method as the Stone of Greater Inertia. This bubble grants the player full fall damage resistance, full resistance to kinetic energy, so you can just slam into buildings at full speed while flying with no downsides, and full knockback resistance. This bubble doesn't seem too flashy, but no fall damage and no kinetic energy is very useful when paired with the Ring of the Dragons in the endgame, and even more so useful when you pair it with like silver armor, increased speed, and the Stone of Greater Inertia, which makes you even faster. Maybe an Explorer's Risotto while swimming and then you land on ground taking a lot of kinetic energy. Basically, the Stone of Inertia Null is basically like patting yourself. It makes you idiot-proof, and I definitely need that because I love speed and I love being reckless with speed. I would say if you go for the offensive potion of flight route with the Faeles Ring, you should definitely go for the Stone of Greater Inertia bubble. And if you choose the Ring of the Dragons, then the Stone of Inertia Null is your best friend. In both of those scenarios, you should be wearing silver armor though, as the speed of the silver armor makes you want these stone baubles even more. You reforge this bubble also with glowing ingots, and it also sits in the S tier. Next up, the Stone of Negative Gravity. This bubble can only be obtained through the same method as the Stone of Greater Inertia and the Stone of Inertia Null. This bubble makes the player levitate when held, and if you go back and forth to the item in your quick bar, it will allow you to fly, albeit, awkwardly at a much slower speed, and it's still very dangerous. If you don't land like in water, you're going to take a lot of fall damage for some reason. This, I don't know, like it doesn't understand that you're flying, it still thinks that you're falling. The bubble also allows the player to rise up one block by left clicking, or to go lower when sneaking and left clicking. This on paper seems interesting, as you could just scale battle towers and reach high areas without utilizing precious flight potions or needing to enter Lost City's dimension. However, the rising and falling with left clicking can be a bit awkward mid-combat in certain dungeons such as mega battle towers, and the fact that you sometimes take fall damage shows that this is a very buggy bubble. Also, when you are not on the ground, your speed is very slow and does not scale with your speed, so even if you're like a maxed speedy character with a Stone of Greater Inertia, you're going to be moving like at a molasses pace in midair still. The worst part though is that this bubble does not work in RLCraft 2.9 at all. It has only worked in RLCraft versions 2.8 and prior. The bubble is merely an extremely rare bubble that is only semi-useful in the mid-game for sniping tower golems while floating in the air freely, and that's if it even worked. If it did work, I would put it like low C tier, since I guess it's a very interesting bubble and a collector's piece, and it does 100% save you from the void. If you have this bubble on, you won't be affected by gravity, so you won't fall into the void. That's probably its best use case. Because of that, I would put it in the C tier. But the fact that it does not work at all in RLCraft 2.9, and if you did get this drop in RLCraft 2.9 while you're looking so hard for a Stone of Greater Inertia or a Stone of Inertia Null, it's going to feel like a massive slap in the face. Because of this bubble, I'm going to have to put this at the bottom of F tier. Next up, so many players' favorite bauble, the Stone of the Sea. This bauble can be crafted with prismarine crystals, glowing ingots, and a single Neptunian ingot in RLCraft 2.9. What this bauble grants you is 400% base swim speed, and infinite respiration while in the water. This bauble is the single best bauble for underwater combat and underwater exploration for those reasons. The bauble in 2.9 is harder to make than before, as the Neptunian's bauble is the only reliable way to get a Neptunian ingot as far as I'm aware, and this mini loot chest can only be obtained through fishing and through very rare bounties that can be found at bounty boards in villages, some larger towns, and oasis villages. Fishing in RLCraft 2.9 is rather tedious and finicky in my opinion, so I usually stay away from it as it feels like a super RNG time sink even when using an enchanted fishing rod with advanced luck of the sea and advanced lure. Bounty boards I think are fine, but I almost never find the bounty giving a Neptune's bounty. I personally would much rather use an explorer's risotto for water combat in the endgame, and while underwater dungeons give great rewards, you never need the rewards unless you want shulker boxes without exploring the end. The bauble on its own is still phenomenal as fast swimming is amazing, so I will place the bauble still in the S tier, but it is in the low S tier since it's harder to acquire and the Wrath pendant exists, which I would argue is almost always better to use. Also, you can drink contaminated water perfectly fine when having this bauble equipped. You reforge this bauble with glowing ingots. Next up, sunglasses. This grants you immunity to blindness. This bauble is easy to make and is a lifesaver in the mid-game against Grues and Reapers. Grues in RLCraft 2.9, if you didn't know, are invisible, and that makes them hard enough to deal with, but now they also inflict blindness. You won't want to have something spawn in the darkness around you if you're not wearing this bauble and or are under-equipped for mid-game combat. The bauble can be found in some low-tier loot spots as well as high-tier loot spots around the world. It's not incredibly uncommon. If you just play the game, you'll definitely find one. The bauble is good. I'm going to place it in the B tier. You reforge the bauble with Spectral Silt. Next up, the teddy bear. The bauble is fairly simple to make. Getting glowing ingots will take you a little while. You won't really get them until the mid game, but it does make the player immune to fear and insomnia. This bauble had absolutely absurd potential if it made the player immune to the fear in the Lost Cities dimension. You know, arguably though, this would have made the bauble overpowered and would make the Lost Cities dimension not very scary, and for those reasons I believe that it was made not to work on that fear. Because of that reason, the bauble did lose its endgame use case, and it threw it down a tier. The immunity to fear still works against specters, which can be annoying in the void or in certain dungeons, but I don't really consider that enemy one of the more dangerous, incredibly scary enemies in the game. And the insomnia debuff that Reapers inflict upon you only lasts a minute when you're trying to sleep, and it's annoying, but I wouldn't really consider it very dangerous. This bauble sits in the low B tier. Moving on to the Toolbelt. This is dirt cheap to make and allows simple swapping between tools and a little extra, storage for your tools. You can make the belt have more tool slots by adding belt patches at an anvil onto the tool belt. The bauble is incredibly convenient all the way to the end game, as the keybind to swap tools can be changed to whatever feels comfortable. And this not only gives the player a bit more inventory space where the tool is used to reside, but it also allows simple access to them while only taking up one spot on your 9-slot skill bar. This bauble sits high in the B tier considering it has next to no downsides and is just plain useful for most players before the end game when you would consider replacing it with an arcing orb. Anyways, you reforge the bauble with leather. Next up, vitamins. It allows the player to wield two-handed weapons without getting the mining fatigue debuff. So it just makes the player immune to mining fatigue. And guardians while underwater will also inflict mining fatigue. The bauble is dropped from the guardians and can be also found in a few endgame dungeons and the Shivaxi monument. The bauble will not make two-handed weapons do normal damage when something is in your offhand though. You will still get that invisible damage nerf. But never getting mining fatigue is certainly convenient. This bauble is a necessity for clearing underwater dungeons fast, as you can't break spawners with the mining fatigue debuff on. This bauble is going to sit into the B tier as well. Next up, the Wither Ring. It's a pretty hard to make bauble requiring Wither Skeleton Skull and steel ingots, which you get easy in the nether through Cincinnacight, or you can also, melt down steel locks. But this ring has a lot more to it than meets the eye. The ring allows the player to inflict wither on opponents with every attack at a 20% chance. This is obviously nice for combining it with Viper. But what is more is that the ring will make you immune to wither from enemies and will make you heal yourself for 1 heart with every attack you do on an enemy inflicted with wither. So if you combine this with Envenomed, now you will just always be healing yourself for even more hearts, and this healing stacks with all other healing sources in the game, works with Paleo Salad or Rejuvenation. You know, you can also have Vampirism and Lifesteal on your weapon. This Wither Ring is another wonderful way to get even more leech effect. I actually had no idea about this ring before researching for this video. You know, it certainly does have competition, since you would prefer not getting one shot in some cases, so you still need to be able to kill the enemy before it might one-shot you, such as Amalgamate. So arguably the Ring of the Health boost is sometimes better if you're at the damage reduction cap and don't need extra healing. But yeah, this ring is amazing. You reforge it with glowing ingots, and I'm going to place it up in the high A tier. The last bauble on our list is the Wrath Pendant, and we are certainly finishing off strong. You can only find this amulet from defeating Amalgamate and or from the Shivaxi Monument, and this pendant makes the player do 80% more damage via the Sinful 4 effect, and also grants the player 2 additional damage. These effects scale with enchantments and overall damage, leading the player to inflict over double damage to enemies. If you were originally inflicting like 1400, 1500 damage with attack, you can expect to, you know, inflict up to like 3300 damage or something. Damage with nunchucks and max enchantments is a bit difficult to predict, but I did find that I double DPS increase solely through the use of the Wrath Pendant. It is absurd as an offensive weapon, and the Sinful 4 effect can be extended with wine and kept on your character forever if you'd like. If you do remove the Wrath Pendant but keep the Sinful buff with wine in order to wear the Stone of the Sea bubble, you do lose out on the additional +2 damage, so there are advantages to just always wearing this, even when you are in a max wine build. Either way though, the bauble is one of the best offensive utilities in the game, competing with the Fenris Ring's 50% attack speed buff. For this reason, this pendant sits comfortably in the S tier, right up next to the other mega amazing baubles. I really like this pendant. Anyways, with that, I'm going to wrap up. I really hope you enjoyed this tier list video. I originally was going to rank the baubles from first to worst like I did in my last tier list video, but I opted not to at the end since there were too many factors to consider for me to feel like I was doing every bauble justice. Overall though, I think I did a pretty good job. Let me know in the comments what you think. I know the video was really long, but I really appreciate it if you watched the whole thing, and if not, you know, I still appreciate you for coming and stopping by. But yeah, let me know, should I have ranked some of the baubles higher or lower? Did I forget to mention something? Probably a handful of things now that I think about it. But anyways, I hope you'll have an amazing day. Thanks again for watching. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.